there was an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. This inscription over the body of Jesus on the cross was placed there to make fun of the Jews. It was written at the direction of Pilate. He had found no fault with Jesus. Pilate had personally examined him. Pilate discovered that he was not a political revolutionary bent on the destruction of Rome. Jesus said he was a seeker of truth, and that those who sought the truth heard his voice. Pilate seemed to see Jesus as a Jew who the leaders of the Jews now wanted to punish. They had persisted in their desire to see him punished by crucifixion. Pilate wrote these words over the head of Jesus on the cross to make fun of the faith of the Jews, to illustrate their poor choice of a leader, and to point out their puny power in comparison with the Roman Empire, which Pilate was to protect and preserve in this part of the world. It is truly ironic that that infamous sign was actually quite accurate about Jesus being a king, but not just of the Jews, but of all beings in the universe. Scripture says that the Jews tried to get Pilate to rewrite the sign so that it read, "This is a man who claimed to be the king of the Jews." But Pilate said the words, "I have written what I have written." He refused to change the words, thus making the point even more obvious. Pilate knew that Jesus was obviously very annoying to many of the leaders of his people, but Pilate, as I mentioned, had found no fault in him. And when Jesus said to Pilate, "I am a seeker of truth, and all who hear my voice recognize it," you can imagine the look on Pilate's face, where his response is recorded by us, although perhaps not the look on his face. When Pilate, this well-educated civil servant, looked at Jesus and said, "What's truth?" He wanted to release Jesus, but a strong objection was made. Pilate was worried that if that objection became too strong, it might jeopardize his power in this far-flung outpost of the Roman Empire, and such a disruption might create social unrest that could prove problematic to his power in the region, and perhaps a problem for his career. His position in the Roman Empire was really a testing ground for him, and his appointment by Rome over this part of the world was not a plum job. He was being tested, and he knew it, and he did not want to mess this up because he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in uncomfortable Palestine. Rome was watching him, and he gave in. And he used this opportunity to make fun of the Jews, of their power, and their so-called stupid theological game. But he was not the only one who made fun of these matters that day. There were two criminals also crucified with Jesus on either side of him. They had been condemned to death for their crimes. One of them derided Jesus and to save their lives as well. The other criminal did not deride Jesus, but admitted his guilt and asked Jesus to remember him when he came into his kingdom. I have often thought of this other criminal, and that he was doing something quite unique. I think it was doubtful that this other criminal could have known who Jesus was. Perhaps he read the sign, we don't know. My guess is he was just being kind to Jesus. And although he didn't know who Jesus was, he was going to be kind. Perhaps he was a king. Jesus of Nazareth certainly did not seem like the kind of man he was. Jesus responded to him with words of kindness and faith. He promised in that moment of terror, that he would be with Jesus in paradise. In the midst of his own suffering, Jesus reached out to another suffering person and did the one thing he could do, to stay with him in his hour of need, and promised not to leave his side as they traveled on the road to their death. Jesus, loving and merciful to the last. That is a man I can admire. That is a ruler I can give my allegiance to. That is a manner of life I want to attempt to achieve. This is a king I can try to serve. This is a God I can worship. Today is the last Sunday after Pentecost, or the feast of Christ the King. We don't have kings and queens in this part of the world. We have a revolution, I think. Or rather, I should say, we don't call them kings and queens. That institution seems to be dying. And although we don't call people kings and queens in this country, it is not necessarily how our elected officials sometimes seem to behave. And although we still admire loving behavior and merciful actions in our elected officials, this behavior sometimes seems in short supply. As a people, we seem so caught up in the drama of winners and losers, of wealth and fame, that a man called Jesus seems an improbable painted image. Yet there he is, the head of the church and the author of our salvation. There he is, on the cross of torture and death. I must admit that the current Pope of the Roman Catholic Church seems more in keeping with this image. He lived among the poor, like us, for 40 years in his ministry, eschewing the lovely apartment set aside for the Archbishop of Brazil. He lived for 40 years among the poor, next door, in fact. He walked the walk, not talk the walk. And when he got into a position of power, largely because he was a conservative theologian in the church, with few public pronouncements to the larger public, except his concern for the poor and the underprivileged, he was elected, much to the surprise of many, in more prominent positions in the Roman Catholic Church. They thought he was safe. He was safe because he was a conservative theologian and seemed to have no interest in pronouncements about much except the poor and the oppressed, who had no vote in these matters. But I think the curiosity in Rome forgot was his actual ministry, done not from the safety of office or apartment, but from his living quarters in the poorest neighborhoods. His was not a project, but a way of life. He allowed himself to be impacted by the central problems of his diocese. He made it personal. He got involved. St. Vincent de Paul, Bishop Reverend once said that because they feel your love, the poor will forgive you for your gifts of bread. Because they feel your love, the poor will forgive you for your gifts of bread. I think he meant that we are all just people here. And that we are much more similar than other ones. And that any gift given to another from any place other than that sense of our common humanity would be seen as a gratuitous handout, as go-away money, so to speak. The power of Jesus came not from his words alone, but from his daily, observable behavior, his manner of life, his devotion to the sheep of his Father, his kindness and strength, even on the cross, even in his darkest time, when even he felt utterly alone. When I look back at people I have known in my life that made a difference to me, they were always the ones who got into the mess I was in. They were always the ones who made my struggle personal to them. They didn't do things for me, but they stayed with me in such a way that whatever anxiety I felt or suffering I experienced, whatever it was shared by them. I felt their presence. I felt by them. I felt by them. And it was transformative.